This meeting will be recorded. The Zoom application will notify you that this meeting is being recorded. Please press continue on the Zoom application to stay in the meeting. Use the raise your hand feature in Zoom when you would like to speak on an item and to also lower your hand when you're finished speaking. Please unmute when called to speak and mute yourself when you are done speaking. If you are calling in by phone, identify yourself by name before speaking on an item. Press *9 on your phone to raise and lower your hand. Press *6 if you are participating by phone to unmute. This is the call to order for the April 15th meeting of the Charter Review Committee. Will staff please call the roll?
Holly Roberts.
Here.
Pat Nikolai. Bernard Tansey. Mohammed Naveed.
Here.
John Brooks.
Here.
Joe Sasinski.
Here.
Eric Crutchlow.
Here.
Bert Field.
Here.
Steve Kelly.
Here.
Lauren Diamond.
Here.
Eric Jensen.
Here.
Mark Beckman.
Here.
Susan Peters.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Joe Sasinski, and I am the Vice Chair of the Charter Review Committee. On behalf of the committee, welcome to today's meeting. At this time, please turn off or mute all electronic devices, including cell phones that may interrupt the meeting. Glenn, remind me, do we get going on the agenda or is there more to this?
I think you've done all of your prefatory remarks. I do want to note, though, oh, no, he's not. I don't think Pat is Pat on. Yeah, we were going to have, just to explain, Chair Nikolai was hoping to be here. He got held up like he feared he might in Oregon on some family business up there. So while he's indicated that he will be participating remotely, he's not able to either participate remotely or be here. And so I might, when we get to the item, suggest that he be excused, from this meeting, given those circumstances, along with Member Crutchlow from last meeting.
Certainly. So we shall do excuse the absences before we move on to the agenda.
You can do that separately, or you can do it with minutes.
Let's have a motion to excuse the absences this meeting of Chair Nikolai and last meeting of Eric Crutchlow. Move. Thank you. Staff, could we please call a vote?
Need a second. Yeah.
I'll second.
Thank you. Seconded. F, please call a vote.
Holly Roberts.
Yes.
Pat Nikolai. Absent. Bernard Tansey, absent. Mohammed Naveed. John Brooks.
Yes.
Joe Sasinski.
Yes.
Eric Crutchlow.
Yes.
Bert Field.
Yes.
Steve Kelly.
Yes.
Lauren Diamond.
Yes.
Eric Jensen.
Yes.
Mark Beckman.
Yes.
Susan Peters.
And Mr. Chair, I might recommend, depending upon whether Member Tansey is able to occur or attend tonight or not, we can handle that excusal at the next meeting.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to business then. We have an action to approve the March 18th, 2026 Charter Review Committee meeting minutes and excuse absent members. Absent members have been excused. Recommendation is to approve the minutes of March the 18th Charter Review Committee in the form presented with such modifications as may be required or requested by committee or the excuse me. I think we've been a little rusty in my second time out here, Glenn. We move to approve the minutes?
Yeah, we do have to solicit public input if there's anybody here to comment on that. There's no one in chambers. Is there anyone online? No one's raising their hand, Mr. Chair, so it would be appropriate for you to entertain a motion to approve the minutes unless anyone has any comments or proposed changes.
Does the committee have any comments or proposed changes to the minutes from the March 18th meeting? I see none. I have a motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a vote to approve the minutes, please.
Yes.
Holly Roberts, sorry.
Yes.
Pat Nikolai, absent. Bernard Tanzi's absent. Mohammed Naveed,
Yes.
John Brooks,
Yes.
Joe Sisitsky,
Yes.
Eric Crutchlow, Bert Field,
Yes.
Steve Kelly,
Yes.
Lauren Diamond,
Yes.
Eric Jensen,
Yes.
Mark Beckman,
Yes.
Susan Peters.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Next item of business. Report outs from the ad hoc subcommittees, groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Len, do you have a presentation or?
I do, and I'm gonna tell you kind of in advance as we're getting closer and closer to actual recommendations coming out of those committees. As you will see, the report outs, at least the part that I'm doing, is getting more and more detailed, just to kind of prepare everybody for the kinds of things that are coming coming your way. And if I might suggest, Mr. Chair, I can do the report out that's on the slide and then ask whenever there's a secretary available and intending to report out for those meetings, they can add, comments to the presentation that I'm able to give for those, because I, as usual, attended every one of them.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Here are our subcommittees. Of course, as you're all familiar, color coded in the way that I still am amused by. Next slide with the report out for Group 1. Group 1 has had a number of meetings. They have had a meeting since the last report out on April 9th, 2026, and they have another meeting already on the calendar for May 12th, 2026. We had almost full attendance with that group and a good substantial couple-hour meeting because we went over a lot of things. The staff presentation included a recap of the subcommittee issues and activities and a summary, which I'm going to provide you again tonight, of since it had just happened, the April 7th report to council on the charter project progress and proposed reorganization. There was a lot of language drafted for this group's review that included proposed reorganization and language to consolidate existing articles 1 through 5 into an article entitled Essential Terms. We're still struggling a little bit with the appropriate title for that section. We'll get it right in the end, or this group will get it right in the end. Some pretty significant revisions and additions to that section of essential terms, and then an initial update of the elected officials sections, all within this Group 1's purview. Specifically, the issues presented and discussed included what to refer to as the definitive authority on city boundaries. We looked at that. It was just, the current language was just a statement that the boundaries of the city were its existing boundaries. And we thought that we should do better than that. There needs to be a reference of what the city's boundaries are. Boundary issues and disputes do arise, so having a legal reference in the charter is recommended. Member Sisitsky did some research on the fly while we were looking at that, and referred to a site that may end up working. It's the LAFCO site, as a lot of you know, local area formation organization commission, is the group that entertains proposal to change, city boundaries, either to increase them or to shrink them, or when areas of unincorporated territories want to form a city, they go through the LAFCO process. So LAFCO is a pretty authoritative keeper of that information. And so we're going to do some additional digging into that and make sure we've got the proper reference for the city boundaries so we can properly refer to them and assert them if we need to. We also talked about the ability that we're confirming to eliminate the article, the entire Article 3 of the charter. As you'll all remember, there's a number of sections there, old sections 300 through 304, that talk about different provisions of law in the city and contracts within the city that, notwithstanding the adoption of the charter, kind of remain in effect. We think those are antiquated and unnecessary, and they were more related to the establishment of the city as a modern charter city in the first place. And so consistent with the charter project where we can eliminate, right, surplus sections, we do that. I think I'm going to suggest and draft for this group's review a sentence in one of their sections that incorporates all of those concepts, because maybe they shouldn't go away entirely, but we're able to eliminate, we think, a good number of surplus language as part of this effort. There was a number of discussions about our continuing effort to convert unnecessary legal language into layperson's language. You know, throughout this section, there's a lot of legalistic terms. Sometimes they're necessary, sometimes they're not. We're still wrestling with, you know, how to properly reflect that. There was some proposed language that was appreciated by the group, especially the lawyer in the group, to make a broader statement about the city's authority as a charter city, including, as you remember, this concept of municipal affairs, which was missing from this charter language, but adding an explicit reference of the to the city's ability to make and enforce all laws and regulations with respect to municipal affairs. So that's being discussed and will end up probably part of the recommendation and coming back to you. Another very wonky addition, but that's important. Sorry, some of this stuff's self-serving for the lawyers who have to interpret this when people ask, is a provision that really talks about very explicitly, again, the relationship between this charter and other laws. Didn't have that before. There are some common law standards of interpretation of charters and how they relate to other laws, but it's not the kind of thing you want to leave to chance, because frequently charter rules are different than the rules that apply to general law cities. And so being very purposeful and explicit about that is important. I won't read you the section. That might be too much for this group, but if people have questions about that after we're done with the group one review, I'm happy to read that or explain that in greater detail. There was also a discussion about in the section where we state what the general powers and authority of the city are, where there are limitations to that, which currently are kind of spread in different parts throughout the charter. Let's consolidate those, right, and put them all in one place. Here's our assertion of authority, and then here are the limitations that we've decided to place on ourselves, that the voters have decided to place, you know, on the city, and to assemble all those. And those are listed here. All of those are under review by different subcommittees, but once we get that language finalized, either tweaking them, deleting them, whatever it is, the thought is to consolidate them here, kind of under the authority section in the beginning of the charter. Those were my recollection of the matters that were discussed with that group. I might ask now, Mr. Chair, because I'm forgetting who who might have been designated, or the secretary is, to report out if there's anything to supplement my description of what went on there.
I think we have members Kelly and Jensen. Are there
I
any?
believe it was me. But yeah.
Sorry,
it's
Member
sufficient.
Jensen.
Thank you.
You have a pretty good version of it?
Yeah, I believe it's sufficient. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. So this group's, one of the things we're being especially purposeful now, as you all know, at the end of subcommittee meetings, is to get another meeting on the calendar, because we're getting to the finish line here. So this group's got a May 12th meeting that's been scheduled, with the hope and aspiration and necessity of my group putting together all the language that this group has assigned to them for their review, all in one place, with the hope that after one more meeting, which may be one of the longer ones, that they'd be in a position to make a recommendation to this larger group at the next report out. So that's the group one presentation there. Any thoughts or comments or questions from the committee about the group one sections?
I have none, so I think we can.
Very good. Group two has had a number of meetings as listed here. They have met since the last report out just a couple days ago. So I don't think we've got those minutes, prepared or uploaded yet, or even the PowerPoint, but we'll make sure those get added and uploaded as kind of an after agenda, materials and posted on the website. And then there is already a next meeting scheduled for that group as well for May 6th, 2026. Had good attendance from that group too. That's everybody who attended. Appreciate that. A especially solid and long meeting that people were begging out of at the end. That's not true. Everyone was eager to keep going, even some, I thought, if I'm remembering correctly. As usual, we had a recap from staff of the previous subcommittee activities from their March 9th meeting and their report out to the March 18th CRC meeting. We also reviewed the proposed reorganization and updated language in a number of sections assigned to this group, the terms for elected officials and term limits, elections sections generally, some of which were assigned to group two and some of which are assigned to group three, the district elections, a redistricting section which we've added for some clarity, mayor's powers and duties, and then a review of some modifications based on the group's request at their previous meeting to the council members' powers and duties section. So on the next slide, a little bit more detail from the things that were talked about. Really, a lot of this meeting was a discussion and debrief amongst the group of the qualifications and requirements for the chief of police. As you remember from the previous month's report out, that there was a good presentation and robust discussion. I was not there for that, and I know there was a lot for people to absorb. So it was good to get the group's feedback and discourse about the qualifications of the chief of police section. There was also a discussion about the clarification of time for commencement and expiration of elected officials' terms. Again, kind of wonky, but it's not clear in the charter the way it's drafted now. I think the proposed revisions make that clear. There was clarification on the term limits. They really are drafted this way, but not as clearly as I think as is useful to folks. There's proposed language now to make it clear that elected officials' term limits are lifetime, term limits, with again, some clarification on existing language in the charter that talks about service that occurred prior to December of 2016 as not counting towards the lifetime term limit. In other words, if you were a council person or mayor before that time period, that time would not count against you for purposes of evaluating whether or not you'd reached your lifetime term limit in being able to consider running again. So again, some clarification of the language there, because we have gotten questions about that. And when I look at the language, it's just, I wish it were clearer. And now I think it is. We also are proposing to add, because currently there is no provision in the charter that does this, nor would I recommend consistent with this group's purpose. We change that as there are no currently proposed term limits for the chief of police or the city clerk. Those are not term limited positions. And so to the extent that's true, as opposed to having people look around and going, wait a minute, where are the term limits for the chief of police? I'm proposing to add a sentence that says they're not, there aren't any term limits for the chief of police. That could be something, certainly if anyone wanted to consider that outside of this process, that could be proposed, but not being proposed now. One of the things we wrestled with was the challenge of the reorganization of the sections that were assigned to group two and group three. there's basically a split based on how the charter is currently organized of the allocation of those sections. So each group is working through their assigned sections, but ultimately both groups probably need to look at all of the sections that they've reviewed all together in one place before the final recommendation can be made. Our next presentations to each of those groups will make that all a little bit more clear. There is now some added clarity along the lines of the section that I just described to you for group one, the relationship of the charter to other laws. There's some clarity within this section about what laws govern the elections here locally, because currently it's kind of a hybrid of laws, right? The charter dictates certain things as a municipal affair about how the elections are run, but our elections are consolidated with state elections that are run by the registrar of voters. And there's rules and terms that apply to that as well. And so this section now makes it very clear that the charter rules are going to govern, but that the state elections rules as necessary are incorporated into what the charter rules are. And to the extent there's a conflict, the charter rules will govern because we're intending that to be the case. There's a little bit of leeway in there to make sure if there are rules that are necessary to run the consolidated election, those would apply as well. But that language, I think, is important and has now been proposed. There's also some language drafted and still a little bit of more work to do for me that I'll bring back after some discussions with the city clerk and the assistant city clerk on how our elections are administered. Again, because it's our charter, but the registrar of voters is actually running the election. There's a lot of cooks in this kitchen, and there's a substantial role for the registrar of voters, but there's a substantial role for our elected city clerk, who, as one of the groups will recall, is our designated elections official. However, the expertise in that office on elections, typically, because most elected city clerks aren't professional, city clerks, is from the assistant city clerk, who is hired, and trained in a full range of clerk responsibilities. So this charter now basically acknowledges all those things and parses, the appropriate administration of elections so that there's no as little ambiguity left as possible in that. Another interesting section that we're wrestling with that I have to draft some language for this group's consideration is what right now is a very blank or very direct, emphatic statement of the city council rule. It essentially says it's the city council roles to judge election returns and member qualifications. And when I read that to the group, everyone said, "What does that mean?" And my response was, that's a great question, because I don't think it's clear what that means, and it warrants, some additional, drafting to make it clear what that means. And so the next go around, I'm going to come back with language to make that clear. Again, not to change the way things are supposed to work and that other laws provide for them to work, but just to make sure it's not a mystery, right? We should be eliminating mysteries where we can in the charter, if we can do that with simple language. And so that's on me to bring that back. There are some additional language and work that was done in the district and redistricting, provisions, including now a section that was missing that basically outlines the redistricting process and how that might work. We are coming up on now, since we've had districts, our first redistricting process. And it really is a very elaborate exercise. I've done it twice now. I worked in my old city, facilitated the original districting, and then did a redistricting, process when the 2020, census came out. And there are some things to think about and time periods, to think about that can't possibly be resolved in the charter. But the charter really should a little more expressly, I believe, imagine at least in broad brush terms, what that looks like in order to set it up so that when it comes time to do that implementation, there's some direction on that. So I've drafted an initial version with some feedback from the group. We'll have a revised version of how that outlines what that process would be. Again, filling a gap, right, that's in the existing charter. There's also work to consolidate all the mayor's powers and duties in one place, just like any number of other things where there are limitations on powers all over the place in the charter. With respect to the mayor, there's also mayor's powers that are spread kind of throughout the charter. They ought to be all in one place, right? So there's some clarity as to what those powers are. So without really substantively changing those powers, the language that this group is looking at kind of really puts them all in one place in the same context that the other powers of the elected officials are presented on. Also, at the request of this group, in relationship to now new language that makes it clear in the charter what constitutes a vacancy. In other words, what events that occur might result in an elected official being disqualified. And another group is working on that. I think maybe it's this group, but there was an idea about that a city council person's responsibility also ought to be to self-report if an event that might result in the vacancy of their position occurs. They should be the ones who reports that, because depending upon the nature of the thing, it might not be obvious. And so there's now a duty on a council person, if one of these things occurs within a certain period of time, to report that to the city council so they can evaluate whether or not that has triggered a vacancy and declare the vacancy and go through the process as contemplated by this charter of filling that position with an appointment. So that's also now been added and will ultimately be part of this group's recommendation when they come back. Member Crutchlow, I think you were going to report out on this, and please add to my somewhat exhaustive presentation.
You did very well. Thank you very much for doing that. I think everything was basically trying to clarify things that were kind of questionable, which is great, and then consolidating. I mean, probably minor, but the only one point, there was a phrase in there about the mayor's powers and recommending about finance and budgeting, which seemed kind of odd the way it was written, and that was probably the only one that you did a very good job of covering everything. But that would be like the only other one that was there. But again, it's all anybody reading it and looking, it's like, what does this mean? And why did they put that in? We're trying to get rid of that. And Glenn's been doing, and staff especially has been doing a great job at helping out and getting that clarified. So that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, very good. Appreciate that. That's one that we'll sort out with the mayor's powers. Yeah, some of this is antiquated. The provision member Crutchlow is referring to has the mayor able to propose changes in city policies or in the city budget, which of course any city council person can do, right? That it's not anything, that in modern terms is unique to the mayor. But if she were to make such a proposal, she would also have to say how that's going to be financed and where the money would come from. And that just seems like a gratuitous requirement, on either council person or a mayor and making that recommendation, because only staff's really going to, be able to, understand that and present that. So maybe that, condition either might be deleted or that power might be added as a council person power, right? So that it's something that all of them have because they all have it already.
Now that you just mentioned it, I was just thinking maybe it's there because somebody wanted to ensure that there was one person responsible for saying, where's the money coming from?
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing I can think of, but I agree. I think, it's like, yeah, we want to fund this. Well, just go ahead and say yes. Well, where's the money coming from?
Mm-hmm.
It would seem to me that it'd be, that's probably what we want.
Some version of that.
You have to say anybody can do it. Just, okay, you want to do this? Great. Where's the money coming from?
Believe me, as part of the budget process, professional staff is always interested, particularly if it's a significant proposal of, okay, where do you want to Where do you want that to come from? But usually that's right, the discussion that you then have, right, with the group. Okay, if any one of you is going to want that to happen, it might cause now some funds, that we're going to go here to be moved, to that. But yeah, so we're trying to put it in context of how it really works, right? As opposed to some limitation on their ability even to propose such a thing, because they might not be able to understand or make a specific recommendation about that unless it's put out on the floor in a larger discussion and sorted out. So again, trying to align what the charter says with how things naturally, and currently work. This group's going to meet again on May 6th. And again, with my goal, maybe aspirational, to have all of these different pieces that they've been looking at, put together in a substantially final enough state for them to be able to make a recommendation out to the one of the then upcoming larger meetings. Any questions from anyone about any of the things I talked about with the group 2 meeting?
We forgot that we had a special guest appearance by Courtney for technical support. And then Javon cruised through. So
Was that the meeting? I'm even lost track.
Yeah.
I've got as any number of you have witnessed. Yeah, I have a technical support team that I'm very that I need more than I care to admit. Yeah, we had was this the one where Javon came to and helped troubleshoot it?
No, that was
Oh.
last week.
Oh, that was a
he
different.
cruised through.
Okay.
He walked through to get a drink and then walked back.
Well, I appreciate all of that. It does take a village, especially for my IT needs, more than that. So, okay, group 3 then has met, of course, a number of times and has met since the last report out, and has another meeting scheduled May 13th. This occurred again not that long ago. There was full attendance with Member Diamond. Thank you for participating remotely. And this is another substantial, again, these, as you guys can see, these are a couple hour, meetings because we're getting into the nitty gritty of the actual review of language with all of the groups. There was a staff presentation, which included the usual presentation and debrief on the discussions. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the one where that I'm losing track, where we spent most of the time talking about the chief of police. We touched on that with the other group because it's all intertwined, but this was the one that had a substantial debrief from the previous meeting. Excuse the faulty recollection on that. And after we had that, we went over some proposed updated language for the director of finance, city manager, city auditor, and city attorney. All of those, positions are assigned to this group 3, in effect, the role and function of the senior leadership team of the city. The detailed issues discussed on the next slide now, of course, is a substantial debrief on the discussions surrounding the role of the city manager versus the chief of police, and who should have ultimate authority over the appointment, removal, or discipline of officers within the police department. The likely recommendation that the group's headed towards is whoever ends up, being recommended to have that ultimate authority should consult with the other, because there's some overlapping responsibilities, and it's currently drafted in the city charter. It's more, the better argument would be it remains a city manager, ultimate responsibility. So how to kind of reconcile that, and then there is a fair amount of discussion with consensus around that as, do we need to go further and define what consult means? What does it mean for one of them to consult the other person in that situation? Very important, but can we get at that in the charter? Given the sensitivity of this area, right, with an elected, chief of police and the role and function of the elected chief of police, any kind of modifications in this area might be politically sensitive. And so depending upon the outcome and how this is received, this may end up being, I think, as I mentioned before, a level 3 issue. That's the kind of thing that you might recommend or the council might ultimately decide is a kind of thing that maybe you don't include that right in the comprehensive proposal. Maybe that's something you pull out and go, hey, let's act on this separately. The goal is to try to make it professional and balanced, enough that it can be included. But again, it's a sensitive area, as we've talked about. We did review some proposed changes to the city manager role and function section. I did get some fairly substantial and helpful input from the city manager himself. And he deputized me to, act on his behalf to represent those things. We teased him a little bit because one of the questions we asked the group was, should the city manager's, provisions be considered, in a section along with all the other senior elected officials, or should it have its own article? The existing city manager thinks he should have his own article. And it's not a bad idea or recommendation. There really is a lot more, right, to his role and function and his oversight. So that may end up making sense in the overall organization of things. There are again, in the spirit of looking at things that are a little outdated, there's a provision in there that prohibits city council members from being the city manager, also being the city manager during their term or any sooner than 2 years thereafter. I think maybe back in the 50s, right? The city manager job wasn't what it is, now. And it might be like, hey, I can be city manager if I'm not on the council. I'll be that. So different now. It's kind of unimaginable, right? That the council person would become the city manager. And so do you delete that, or are you communicating to the public, oh, now a city council person could be a city manager, right, when they were prohibited before? So it's one of those things that we're trying to figure out, right? Who's the audience and how are they going to perceive it? Even if it's kind of silly and antiquated, it might be a necessary thing to retain, because none of us want to give the wrong impression on what the intent of this is. There's also provision that prevents the city a relative of the city manager from being employed by the city. And some of the thoughts around that was, oh, why can't the city manager's kid, be a lifeguard at a pool, right? Or have some kind of summer job. But is that kid going to get special treatment? Is that kid going to be allowed to do stuff that kid ought not to be able to do because their parent, is the city manager? Maybe it's a little silly to have it in the charter, but again, should you take it out? Even if it's a little silly, it probably makes sense to keep a provision like that anyway, which was the discussion about that. I, of course, made my pitch for the city attorney, sections. I don't have a conflict of interest so much as I do a vested interest. Yeah. But if people want different thoughts from other attorneys, I could certainly solicit those. But and this is similar to the chief of police, dilemma. The chief of police has a thought that they are overseeing a professional group, right, that has special rules and roles, and who knows better than the chief of police, right? Who to hire, who to be disciplined, where you cut slack, where you don't. Well, I think that about the city attorney is, as well. City manager is not qualified to evaluate, lawyers the same way that I am, or either for purposes of appointment or, for purposes of discipline or advancement. Shouldn't the city attorney, as a matter of their kind of duties as the primary legal advisor, be able to, have responsibility over their team? So I'm proposing that. It's an interesting, conversation. City manager probably wants to retain that authority with respect to that position as well.
I mean, at the very least, if it's your kid's firm, for example, you know.
Yeah, that's right. I do get to have my children work though here. There's not a provision for that. No, that wouldn't be allowed either. Another provision presented was the idea that the boards and commissions would not have the authority to require written opinions of the city attorney, just city council. Written opinion is a pretty substantial work effort. And if that's being required by all the boards and commissions, that would be a lot. And then there was a good discussion around the city attorney qualifications. Currently, the language requires 4 years of experience, as an attorney to be qualified to be appointed as the city attorney. That is, of course, an absurdly low, standard, both in terms of years of experience for cities like this, and you could be a patent lawyer or a estates and trust lawyers for 4 years in theory, right, and qualify for this. But you also don't want to be too limiting, because there are unique people, right, who might have other kinds of experience that could qualify them. So the consensus, or where the group's headed, I've got to draft some language, is to increase 4 at least to 7 years. We talked about as many as 10, and really 20 is probably the right amount for a city like this. But with other qualifications as may be approved by the council, commensurate with the demands of the position. So again, the charter is not supposed to create hiring specs, for positions, but at least it's supposed to give some general guidance. And so that's where things are at now. There's also a good discussion around the city auditor's roles and responsibilities. The city auditor himself suggested, in addition, to allow that, to contemplate that position, not just doing financial audits, but also doing performance audits of the city. But there's also a concern at that position as potentially being weaponized, right? Who's telling the auditor, how many audits there should be, and who should be audited and who shouldn't be. So we're giving some thought, and I'm going to have some additional discussions with the auditor, whether or not there should be some guidelines, around that, to make sure that independent authority doesn't get abused. A lot for this group still to talk about. The next meeting is scheduled for this says May 6th.
Yeah,
That's
before
not
it says
right.
13th.
This one, it should say May 13th, right? Yeah, excuse that. That's my error in putting this together. Their meetings, the next scheduled meeting is for May 13th on that. And again, the aspiration to have all final language in front of that group for the potential ability to make a recommendation to the larger group. Is there a group 3 report out person, or anybody from that group that wants to augment how I presented the discussions?
I think member Nikolai was going to do the report out, but
How convenient.
I think you covered it well.
Very good. Thank you. That's right. It was Pat who was supposed to do that. Yeah, very good.
Can I ask questions?
Mr. Chair, this would be the appropriate time for that, so I'm comfortable with that.
On the family and friends section of the city manager,
Mhm.
you were talking about relatives. I was thinking about, just honestly, if there's something in there that you have a friend or something that could potentially look suspicious, that if they do want to do it at that point, it has to be brought to some other, I hate to say city council, but let's say city council would then say, okay, yeah, we know you're bringing your son to be a lifeguard. Yeah, it's fine. But then it's public and notified versus, okay, I have some friend, I want them to have this position and they're going to get paid $350,000 and, no one's going to question it. No, I think that, it should have something in there that if you have some kind of prior dealings or relations or whatever, that be brought out and then somebody else kind of blesses it off.
Mr. Chair, some thoughts on that. I get that. I get that thought. And it's easy when it's the way it's currently drafted, where there's an outright prohibition on a married or blood relative. But what does a friend mean? I mean, there's the professional people in our circles develop pretty substantial relationships with other, colleagues as a result of being on committees together, being at conferences together. If you've worked in multiple cities, right, there'll be a group of people that you develop relationships with over time. And very frequently, I will say, if you've got a position open, in your organization and somebody, right, who you've worked with or have a relationship with, you will invite that person, to apply, for that position. And the idea that there would be either a prohibition on that or some supplemental review of that, I think it'd be hard to define what level of friendship, right, and relationship might be regulated by that. So it's not, I appreciate the point. I'm just, as I think about how it actually works.
But the way you just worded it
Yeah.
is actually good, because I'm saying, I know somebody professionally, they have experience in this area, and I'd like to bring them in. It's the ones where like, oh yeah, I have this friend and they are a patent lawyer, but I'm going to bring him on a city, attorney, whatever, something where it's like, wait a minute, there can be some question as to, is this person qualified to do whatever? So.
Yeah, I'll tender that, group 3. I'll tender that to the group. You're not with that group last time, or if any group members wanted to come, that can be socialized, with the group for discussions at their next committee meeting. It's a fair thought. I'm just giving my initial reaction, not a.
No, the way you explained it, actually, that would be fine if that's the way it worked.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yep.
you have to, we have good people, but you got to plan for the unknown.
Yep, something to wrestle with. I'll also try to look into what the other rules that might apply to that, either in the city manager has, like city attorneys do, has a substantial code of ethics that they're responsible for complying with. I have a feeling there might be a provision in the code of ethics that would prohibit, inappropriate engagements or hiring of people who aren't qualified. So that would be the kind of thing I would look at and discuss with the group when I get back with them.
So Glenn, for the sake of those, or at least me, who is confused, what exactly were we referring to with your question, your soliloquy with Member Crutchlow?
I'm sorry, could you say that again, and maybe into the more into your
Retain
microphone?
outdated provision prohibiting city council member. Sorry.
Yeah.
This next one, the city attorney should have appointed or removed disciplinary.
No, it's this one
Where's the friends and
here.
family?
Retain provisions preventing city manager relative being employed by the city.
Yes.
You're saying, hey, should we consider maybe expanding that to have some standard applied or guideline or additional review for people who are friends in effect of the city manager?
To your point, if there is a code of ethics, and I would assume there is somewhere in there for the city manager.
I'm going to look at that to see if there's a separate standard that may be a better, reference point, for that, or even could include some language, right? That is balanced, to include. I'm just hesitant to try to get too much again, because how do you define a friend? And again, there's so many professional relationships that you become friends, right? With people.
That part's okay. I like that part. It's like, I know professionally this person is qualified to do this. And, like you've said before, it's not a bad thing to also maybe just not put too much in the charter, but say, city council will come up with an ordinance and guidelines, so it's outside of the charter, so to speak, and that they can change it as needed. So that they put an initial thing in there and it's like, hey, this is not working.
Right.
You can change an ordinance. It's just like when Congress passes a bill, if they ever do, there's a regulatory agency normally that's involved that then says, okay, how do we specifically implement this?
And some agencies have, I appreciate that. Some agencies have what are called compliance officers that kind of review, those things. because there's hiring standards, right? And there's ethics, standards that apply to that. And a compliance officer would might oversee those things. I will tell you, I'm a little less concerned about it with a city manager as opposed to an elected official in that manner, because if a city manager is inappropriately hiring people who are his or her friends that aren't qualified to do the work, that's going to reflect on their performance and they can be fired. So there is also an
We have
immediate
history of
remedy,
this.
to that.
Yeah, we have some history of some of these things, so I would say
Yeah.
just, we don't have to go crazy, but I think, again, maybe something that says at least the city council has to make an ordinance or guideline that helps
Yeah,
with,
I appreciate
HR
that.
can do it or whatever.
Yeah, good. We'll work that up a little bit more in committee and discuss it.
Any other questions on that part? Okay.
I'd just like to add that this is no different than any other profession in the world. If you're working in the real world and you meet somebody you know and like, and you think they're pretty good, you may suggest them to move on. I mean, it's just, we have eyeballs, we know people, we have relationships. Just because someone is a friend of yours doesn't mean they're not also qualified.
Yeah, that's what I agree. And I think member Crutchlow agrees too. We're just kind of wrestling with if there's anything more that,
Yeah,
That belongs in there.
It's more if somebody is obviously like not qualified, like if you said, hey, Eric, why don't you become, the city council, it's like, yeah, there's no way I'm qualified for it, right? So it's more to cover that kind of area because we've had some history of seeing some of this, but yeah, I don't want to go debate this too much to death. I think, maybe something that's in there again, that then can be done by ordinance. So council can change it as needed. And if they say, hey, really, we're fine with the way things are going, fine.
very good.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Mr. Chair, ready to go on? Yes.
I do have two more questions.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yep, not at all.
Okay, real quick on the 4 years experience for the city attorneys. I was wondering, is there any kind of certifications that say, okay, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a patent lawyer and I have a certification in city legal stuff?
There is not.
Okay, so then writing something in there saying, okay, it's more than just 4 years experience in law. It has to be more specific to the kind of law that's being done by cities. Is that what you're contemplating for this?
Yeah, I think the idea would be to get qualifications approved by the council commensurate with the demands of the position was how we kind of intended to get at that in a broad brush way. This is a sophisticated city. The hiring decisions made by city council need to be made in public, right? And so it'll be pretty obvious, and they generally do pretty substantial either recruitments unless they're hiring someone in-house, right? Who, as a result of that, probably is inherently qualified, right? If they've worked some number of years in-house to be elevated. So I get the point. There's not a clear criteria here. I'll tell you, we wrestled with this down in Chula Vista, where it was more important because it was an elected position, there. And so, what kind of qualifications should you put on that and what should be left to the voters, right? You don't want to be so permissive that anyone could run or be hired, right? That's not remotely qualified on the one hand. And on the other hand, you don't want to restrict the ability of someone to run and let the voters decide, right? Relative to, amongst the people who run, who's more qualified. And if you're too strict with it, particularly in the electoral context, you might have a dearth of candidates who even meet those qualifications, who'd be crazy enough to run, for elected office like I was. And so they ended up actually revising it down there to increase it. I think down there it's now 10 years experience for an elected city attorney, in that case, city attorney. And there was a lot of discussion around, well, shouldn't it be, a municipal lawyer? And it's hard to define what that, really is. And there is no certification, for it. So they ended up leaving it alone. But they increased it from 7 to 10. And then they imposed a residency requirement because it didn't have a residency requirement, before. And that was even hotly debated because even though Chula Vista was a big city, how many people are going to be 10-year lawyers who, have the kind of experience, that you really want and that are also residents, right? There's just not too many folks. So there's good conversations around that to be had. This group's discussing it. I think they ended up so far in a place that makes sense with the language that I described.
I had another question. I just want to make sure if anybody else wanted to comment on this before I go.
Anybody else have another question or this question?
All right, final question on the last one, the city audit and performance audits.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any particular standards in Gatsby or anything like that can be referred to? So like in the industry, this is the standard by which we will, maintain our performance audits and such like that.
Yeah, there are. I don't know if that's as true for performance audits.
Sometimes there's just recommendations saying it should be, you should do one for this on these occasions and this, or, upon the, these actions occurring. You can just take it as a no. You don't have to respond at this time if you don't want.
Yeah, the language doesn't currently have that, but I'll make a note of that to discuss with the group as well.
Thank you.
Before we move on, since we have members Diamond and Naveed with us tonight, would either of you like to comment on what Member Crutchlow had to say?
What Mr. Crutchlow has said, and also very good summarization of the details that Mr. Glenn has shared. I think I agree to some of the questions that you have raised, and in response to some of the comments that you have also, because in our professional life, I also would suggest someone who has got experience to just come and apply to this role. But there should be some criteria during the process. There is an interview process and there is a process of getting them hired. Having that ethics, right? It makes sense to actually go and evaluate and it makes sense or not. Yeah, so I think we'll discuss this broadly within the team.
All set? Okay. All right. Then over to you.
Next group. Group 4, boards and commissions, composition, powers, and duties. This group's had a lot of meetings. They've also had a lot of good stakeholder input. They've not had a meeting since the last report out, but there is one scheduled for April 16th. Yeah, tomorrow. My 4th night meeting this week. I'm setting a record. People are both feel bad for me and make fun of me, for all the meetings we're having, but I am, or worry about me, like my staff, but I'm enjoying it. So we'll keep going. The report out from the March 12th meeting, which was the most recent one, you already had. I've just got a slide, for that here, but that's already been reported out and reported out to the committee itself. So I won't belabor the group 4. I will add, though, an item that wasn't included here, which I think we might have talked about, but it's not on the slide, so I wanted to make sure it wasn't lost. This group, the Board of Library Trustees, which was the focus of the March 12th meeting, recommended all of these things about their powers. You'll remember they're giving up quite a lot because the charter provision currently has them administering the library system, which they don't do and haven't done for decades. But they still want to retain some, power and authority. And so that's what these sections here talk about, the balance of that. But the other thing that they mentioned that other groups are thinking about and considering as well is whether or not to expand the access to Board of Library Trustees representation, whether or not the qualified elector requirement should be relaxed so that I shouldn't say it this way, but mere residency, would be necessary. And if you remember from previous point out, a qualified elector is someone who is a registered voter, within the city. And to be a registered voter, you need to be a citizen. And so part of this is very consciously, to try to expand the tent, right, and include people who aren't necessarily, U.S. citizens, but nonetheless are residents, here with a stake in the community. So Board of Library Trustees thought that was important enough, at least to recommend with respect to their commission, and other ones are weighing in on that and still will present to the group on the 16th about that and other things. That was the last meeting. It just, again, to repeat it, but there's a meeting, as I mentioned, coming up on April 16th. At that meeting, Planning Commissioner Cherakuru will be, has been designated. What? She's not able to make
Not
that?
able to meet tomorrow, so
Oh, shoot.
I will talk to you about alternatives.
Okay.
Afterwards, if I can.
Yeah, very good. We had a little miscommunication. Unfortunately, Priya was on this committee meeting under the impression she was presenting to this group, which I don't think is the appropriate, channel for that, right? It should go to the subcommittee and then the subcommittee digests that, right? And then presents out. So our apologies for any miscommunication to her about that. Planning Commission, as Member Crutchlow knows, who chaired that, really took this up very seriously with an initial presentation from me and then another meeting scheduled, right, to really dig into it. And so you're working on potentially a different mechanism
We'll
for
have somebody
report
else, and
out.
you can always blame the chair for being an idiot.
I would never do that. But I would instead take responsibility myself. So we can talk about how to make sure that there is a record of it, right, with a memo that's drafted that either staff or another designee, might be able to present to tomorrow's group. So some version of that will come back to the group on the 16th with apologies to Planning Commission Chair Kuru. But we also have, and very impressed with how this group was able to take this issue up in very short notice. The Parks and Rec Commission took this up at their commission meeting on Monday, a night when I had 3 meetings and presented primarily to the committee, but popped my head in at the other ones as well. And Parks and Rec Commission in one meeting took a presentation and developed their comments and has deputized staff to present those and their input on their thoughts about both the composition and roles and functions of the Parks and Rec Commission. And they had a good discussion about Measure R, right? The provision that requires votes for any disposition or change of use of park property. They had a good discussion about some modifications that could be made to that along the lines of what the Planning Commission, talked about, because I know that came up, with your group as well, with, I think, similar outcomes with the idea of at least some provision to allow for ancillary, uses, but I don't want to get ahead of them. That presentation is going to come to the committee on the 16th. So that's group 4. Are there any group 4 members who would like to supplement or disagree with any of the things that I just presented on your behalf?
Yeah, we're good on group 4. Go ahead.
Very good. Group 5 met a lot, but hasn't met for a while. The next meeting is still to be determined. The early work that you did, though, is in process. The meet and confer process has been initiated, and preliminary input from actually the impacted labor groups has been received and is being analyzed, and those labor groups are being engaged with as part of that consultation kind of meet and confer process. And so once that's complete and as much of that as can be resolved as possible, that's going to come back to the subcommittee if we have time, and or directly to this committee. And to the extent issues are resolved, labor groups may or may not, come and present, to the committee itself to express, their issues or concerns about the proposed changes that this group so far has just approved in concept, right, in order to initiate that process subject to the feedback that's coming. So that's in process, and hopefully we'll catch up because we started it early on, as you remember, on purpose, out of necessity. Any questions about where that's at from anyone? Okay, lastly, group 6. I apologize, on the version of the PowerPoint that you was sent out, there's an extra provision, a bullet underneath the April 6th that on the slide has been deleted because it was a carryover from an earlier meeting. So scratch that out or ignore it on your printed your PowerPoint. Group 6 met on February 4th. They've met on March 17th as well. The next meeting is scheduled for April. Oh, I'm sorry. This is an old slide. The meeting since report out should be April 6th, 2026. And on the next slide, we'll do the report out from the April 6th meeting. Apologize for not having updated that one properly. Next slide. At the April 6th meeting, had full attendance, quite a meeting, over almost 2.5 hours. Staff presentation, of course, included a recap of the March 17th meeting, which, as this group will recall, and maybe the larger committee after the report out, was focused on public works contracting, including a stakeholder presentation, which was very well done by Director of Public Works, Craig Mobeck. And the group went over and reviewed 2 primary proposed updates for the Public Works sections. One, basically a wholesale replacement of what those sections currently made with a set of standards to be implemented by ordinance. And the other one, really keeping a lot of that language intact, but increasing the dollar limits. In each case, there was going to be provisions made for alternative procurement mechanisms that would allow for design build, procurement, as well as other similar type alternatives that were different than the traditional design, bid, build, and award to the lowest responsible bidder. Both Public Works and Silicon Valley Power are very interested in having an update in this that allows, at a minimum, these alternative procurement mechanisms. They are very suited for more complicated projects like the kinds of things SVP, builds for the electric transmission system. And they're also very useful for the kinds of things that are now being built with the oversight of Public Works, using the Measure I, monies, the $400 million of infrastructure monies. A lot of it's going to the potential construction of sophisticated projects like firehouses, like potential updates to the International Swim Center, and those types of things are viewed as ideal projects for alternative procurement mechanisms that right now under our charter, the way it's drafted, they can't deploy. And so that was the focus of that meeting, and that's definitely going to be a recommendation of some form that's still being discussed that's going to come out of that group when they ultimately report out. At this meeting, really it was the focus was on the finance part of the sections of part of the Group 6 allocated assigned provisions, and that we're very helpful to have a presentation and question and answers with the Director of Finance, Ken Lee, on the city's existing budgeting and accounting process, and why updates to these budget and accounting sections are really necessary in order to align with modern standards of how that works. So the issues that group dug into on the next slide, thank you, were changes throughout these sections to allow for but not require biannual budgeting. You've heard that before. The sections as currently drafted in the charter only contemplate an annual budget process, but our city for some number of years out of compliance with the charter has been doing biannual budgeting, and probably will for the foreseeable future. So it should at least be contemplated, if not required. There were discussions, and again, this is in reviewing, the actual language that was drafted, terms for updating and simplifying the budget preparation and approval process. There was a lot of detail about how the city manager needed to solicit and then would receive back and then would comment on, proposals from the different departments that really aren't necessary and just happen as a matter of course. So that was simplified. There was also a lot of discussion around whether or not there should be specific reserve requirements. The current language that was drafted proposes levels of reserves to be determined by the city council in consideration of and recommendations from the city manager. But there was a lot of concern by this group on fiscal, management of city resources. And should we develop, more specific standards, in the charter? I'm resisting that a little bit, I'll admit, just because those standards can change, over time. And so this group's wrestling with, whether or not a general concept for the maintenance of reserves in accordance with professional standards or more specific provisions should be included. As with all sections that have notices for certain actions that need to be taken, the way the charter reads now, it's all posting and mailing and putting in the newspaper. That's going to be modernized, now to make sure it uses modern resources, and posting on the website so that anyone who wants to provide input on the budget can be notified in a more modern way. And then there was a fair and good discussion about the provisions for the administration of and amendments to the budget, including an analysis of the value or legal necessity for 5 votes to amend the budget, as opposed to a simple majority. The legal analysis that was done led me to conclude and advise this group that even though a 5-vote requirement to amend, budgets is pretty standard throughout general law and charter cities. In fact, it was not a legal requirement, and the charter could be legally revised to require only 4 votes. There's some hesitance to do that, though, because it's an existing restriction, right? That is intended to have amendments be exceptions to the budget process, as opposed to just something that's done in course. And so the group's wrestling right now with maybe a version that says, hey, 5 votes to change budget or change amend the budget in a way that takes money from one place and puts it in another, but still maybe only 4 votes for an allocation of money that's new to the city. Sometimes you get grants, you can get unanticipated revenues. It's not changing something that you already approved in the normal, more elaborate budget process. Instead, you're just appropriating those monies in the first place. And so language like that's being developed for this group to review and consider as part of their final recommendation. There's also under review with some interesting pending results that I will present to this group at the next meeting. The public debt, provisions that are currently in the charter, they're being reviewed by our bond counsel and outside special counsel. Boy, these are really old and outdated and talk about things and budget and finance mechanisms that aren't even used any longer. Since I think these provisions were put in there, there are a whole lot of other constitutional, provisions and laws that have been developed that limit, how cities can issue debt and where you're allowed and where is required a vote. So the next presentation will get at all of that. One of the sections that's being looked at, our outside counsel is actually proposing be deleted almost entirely because it really no longer applies and unnecessarily there's a workaround, for the kind of finance mechanism that this thing appears to, govern. And since there's a workaround, already, why not allow it, in its more, modern, convenient, streamlined way? So we're going to get that more specifically reported out on and presented to this group 6 at their next meeting. There is agenda for May 11th meeting or there's a meeting scheduled for May 11th. And again, with this group aspirationally, and I think realistically, we're looking to have all the final language proposed for all sections, and again, have them in a position to make a recommendation shortly thereafter to the larger group. Any group 6 members, Mr. Chair, who might want to supplement or disagree with me on that report out, now would be the time.
Member Brooks?
Yeah, no disagreement. Thank you. But there was a couple of things that we really, I think Bert would agree with that too, talked around, and it was a standardization around the reserve. And there was a real big discussion about the pool, as everybody knows. So it was like, what do we put in the language to really make sure that doesn't happen again? And then from the budget, Glenn talked about the amendment to a budget, and we discussed new monies as well as a reduction, because Ken had a real big problem reducing the budget, and it needed 5 votes instead of 4. And he was just trying to save the city money, and he had that struggle. So should we categorize those 2 things?
Thank you.
And then the last thing I have is just a percentage of budget for capital maintenance and a minimum capital reserve.
Anybody else from group 6?
Yes.
Mr. Crutchlow, go ahead.
Actually, it was a great meeting, and seeing Ken there in person was just the next level. Great to get feedback directly.
Yeah, in fact, Ken's is fantastic, and the committee, joking, not joking, proposed to include language in there requiring Ken Lee to be the finance director in perpetuity. May not have been this group, it might have been the other group, but I think it was this group that is proposing that. So that'll be something that when Ken gets to review this, he'll see that in there. We'll see if he notices and objects to it.
I believe there was something about him keeping 2 sets of books as well.
Yes, we also jokingly were going to require that he keep, I think this was in the role and function group, right? We'll require him to keep 2 sets of books, right? So we'll see what he notices about that. We're going to have fun with Ken if he's going to show up at subcommittee meetings.
I'm going to have to snitch you out and say you also were giving examples of how we should reduce the budget of legal counsel. I don't know why, but you did.
Yeah, that's right.
I second.
All right. I do have a serious one though. So one of my things that I always bring up about this, and one of the reasons I very much wanted to be on this committee, was when we talk about reserves, the real problem I have with the way that the city has been run is we just passed a $400 million bond issue, which was actually, there was an ask for over 600 million because of all the things that we needed to do. And my big problem is, like, if you do not plan for your reserves and do this in a proper manner, like, hey, I know I'm going to replace the swim center. It's going to have a life of 30 years. I should be saving money every year to know that that will need maintenance and it will need replacement at some point. And even the stadium authority, part of the contract is who pays to tear down the stadium. And it's actually, I think, Glenn, that's on us. The city has to
It's actually
pay
not,
for some of it.
it's actually not on us. It's on the,
I thought we had like $7 million budget that had to be in there.
there's, so it's a little more complicated than that, but
Okay, well-
quickly, it's that the stadium authority funds out of revenues a $70 million contribution towards the demolition or renovation, and any amount beyond that is the responsibility of the 49ers. Yeah.
Great. So my thought was, there's too many examples. When you ask people who live here and own property, you're going to pay more taxes, which we do, to pay for this bond, I think it is not the way you want to do it. You want to plan for your expenses and future finances. I don't want to put a burden on anybody else. And so one of the things I had discussed briefly was a finance committee made up of citizens that will have oversight and see, hey, are you making these plans? Are you making these reserves? And if not, why? Because at some point it's going to come back to us and you're going to pay for it one way or the other, right? And so we have enough examples. And I think when somebody asked me for over $600 million that we have to fund, that concerns me and that we need to do something better. So one of the things that I have been pushing is that although I know Glenn has very nicely pointed out, says, Eric, that is a level 3. I would go and say it's a level 4 ask. There is another way to do it. We can create a separate committee from the city council. It doesn't have to necessarily be done in the charter, but I think we should say something about that in proposing this to city council. Whether we have a finance committee that's in the charter or that the city council should make one, I think we should bring it up because I think that's very important. It's been a lot of money that we spent and it really disappoints me that this is the way the city has been run. And it's not just the current city council. I mean, this has obviously gone on for years. Kick the can down the road is not a way to budget. Thank you.
Glenn, I believe you concluded your presentation on that.
Yeah, very good. I think that's great. And we're we're working on some concepts of that with potentially some couple of different options for the group, to recommend along those lines beyond even what I drafted already. So I'm hearing that from more than just Member Crutchlow as something folks are interested in. So at least some option will come back to that subcommittee and ultimately to the CRC, to look at.
Wonderful. Thank you for your stamina tonight on that. We'll now open it up to public hearing. Does the staff would ask any members of the public wish to speak?
There's not.
There are none. Presenting staff, if you have the stamina, have you anything else to speak on that point?
I think we've got the report outs covered.
All right. We'll close the public hearing on that and bring the item back to the committee for discussion. Is there any discussion on that item that was not brought up during that item? See no discussion. I'd like a motion to finish that one off.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate your parliamentary observances, but I don't think you need to actually do that from the group. You as presiding officer can decide we just move on to the next item.
Excellent. Let's move on to the next item.
You might as well enjoy your power while you have it.
I did remember to wear the coat just in case. I will now move on to the next item, staff presentation and solicitation of committee input or direction regarding April 7th report to the city council regarding the charter project progress to date, proposed comprehensive reorganization plan and schedule. Second, the comparison and lessons from Santa Clara's comprehensive charter update from year 2000. Third, charter's project work plan and scheduling update. Staff, do you have a presentation?
Yeah, very good. Thanks. Back to me. I was at least got a breather there. A couple of the subcommittees have already heard this report out, but I'll do a quick version of it here for this group. As you all know and remember, back, I think even in your February 18th meeting, we talked about wanting to give an update to the council, right? So they knew where we were at, and we wanted to include in that the thing that we were talking about as a comprehensive reorganization of the charter so that they wouldn't be astonished, right, when it came back, looking like it's going to look with all the work that's being done on it. And we weren't able to schedule that because the agendas have been so packed. And because the agendas have so packed, I also made, and pardon me for this executive decision, to actually include that item, that report out to them on their consent, agenda, which is something that allows them to pull the item if they have issues or concerns or questions, and provide, comments on it. But it also can stay on the consent agenda, right, and be approved in mass, with the other items. And so that's how it was presented to them on April 7th, item 3D on the consent agenda. With this agenda, you've got the RTC, the report to council that we put together in order to give them a status update. And I think we attached the PowerPoint too to this agenda as well. So you have the PowerPoint that I ended up not ever giving, but what was available there as we call that a pocket, PowerPoint in the event that the item was pulled. The report to them included a background of the charter project origins and the creation of the CRC. Of course, they're familiar with that because they did it, but it's been a good 7 months, right, since they did all of that. And so to remind them of that, of how we got where we got, I thought was useful. And for the public, if anyone was looking at that, right, and tracking it, publicly. It also included a statement and a reminder of the charter project purposes that were formally adopted along with the CRC bylaws. You remember that was an important part of creating a focus and narrowing, the focus of this group so that it wasn't a hodgepodge of anything anyone thought of. It instead is the update, as you all know, that we've been working within the spirit of. And then it gave a summary of the CRC activities to date, including the formation of your ad hoc subcommittee working groups, which, as you know, has been a pretty good, I think, successful driver, the engine of the kind of this work effort as was intended. They were informed, as they already had been in a separate memo, but the approval and concept of the changes to the Article 11 civil service rules and the sections regarding the Civil Service Commission so that we can initiate the consultation with labor groups. So they're now re-informed of that process going on. They also were presented the actual language for the different levels that we created with some input from the group of how ultimately we're going to categorize the different changes. Member Crutchlow is trying to create levels 5, 6, and 7 with some of his ideas, so far. But at least the basic levels, including now level 4, was presented to them again. So they hopefully will be socialized and familiar with some of these things when it comes back. And then maybe most importantly, presentation of the proposed charter reorganization that was designed to improve user friendliness, including, you'll remember, the slides of the pros and cons, on that. So they saw what the group wrestled with and ultimately, the decision that it made sense if we're going to do all this work, to let's do it in a format, that makes the most sense. The item, as I mentioned, allowed the city council to pull the item if there are any issues, questions, or concerns, and no one did. So it was approved along with the other consent items as a note and file item. I do want to recognize, though, and extend further appreciation to members Tansey and Roberts, who were in the audience to present and answer questions if the item was pulled. Member Nikolai also told me he was on standby if it got pulled and was prepared to come over, and present as well. Member Tansey has never looked better. He was wasn't like for a gala or anything, but he was fully suited and looked great. Member Roberts, I think, was more casually attired, but definitely ready to go. When after the item, in effect was approved, right, and not pulled from consent, I went over and said, "Hey, good, you guys are good to go. Thanks for being here." And they're like, "What? What do you mean?" I'm ready to present. I'm like, "Well, you could still ask, to present or present in public presentations if you want." And they stayed to observe, but I think you guys being engaged in it obviously was valuable and important. And I wanted to thank the volunteers for doing that. A lot more of that's going to be required, right, when it actually comes back to them with more of your voices, than mine, because I think it's important they hear from you all and your experiences with the process. So thanks to them, a successful item. I do feel like the council's been checked in on, right, and given a full update, on where we're at, and hopefully to prepare them for the things to come, including the schedule of how we're contemplating, getting to the finish line here amongst this group, and ultimately the timeline for the presentation to them, which we'll talk about in a second. Any questions about how that went down with City Council, or comments from Member Roberts as an attending, observing commissioner?
Always interesting. Those meetings are always interesting.
Oh, yes, you were exposed to a few other things of the goings-ons, there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Member Tansey had a speech prepared. I just had notes in here to, if they wanted examples, I had notes on standby, but yeah, it's all good.
Very good. Yes.
Question, was that one of the Batman who came in town, or, okay. Right.
No, there are no costumed people there other than Member Tansey. Yeah, comparison. Any other questions, Mr. Chair, on that item? We can go to the next slide. Comparison lessons from charter update in 2000. You'll all remember that as we've talked about this process, the most recent really attempt at a comprehensive update of the charter was 26 years ago, but we hadn't been able to find any real, other than a general description of that it was a comprehensive update, the actual nuts and bolts of what was done. City clerk doesn't have a record of it. It's not on the ROV, at least anywhere I found it. Well, one of my legal assistants found it in sorting through our files, an underlined strikeout version of that charter amendment proposal. I can't swear to you because it's not official, right? It's just something that was in the file. That is the actual final, version of what was proposed, but it appears to be a substantial, final version and align, with the changes that were proposed. And so, as a matter of context and reference for this effort, I have attached that to this agenda item, if you care to look at it. And I wanted to talk about it at least a little bit for your reference and for the public's reference for anyone observing tonight. There were changes throughout, but for anyone who's looked at it, and I think I distributed copies at least at one of the subcommittee meetings because we'd found it before then, a very light touch compared to what you're going through here. So I'm not sure there's too many lessons, to be learned, from it, but I thought I'd share with you some sample changes to what their changes were. They, in this case, added language regarding required residency and qualified elector status that had not been explicitly stated that way before, but that was added back in year 2000. They added language.
Real quick, then, to be clear, these are changes that were made as a result of this process?
Yes.
Okay, they were
Yep.
added to the charter.
Yes, these were all things that were proposed to be changed and were adopted, with one exception that I'll note at the end. They added language preventing a city council member from running for another city council seat if they had more than 6 months left on their term. It's an interesting provision that I think is now antiquated and no longer relevant. And the group that's looking at that section is taking that up. Back then, you'll recall that they were, the council sections weren't districted. They were just numbered. And so in theory, any council person could run for any council seat because they were all elected at large. And this was intended to, prevent someone from being cute, right? Some would say, or strategic or democratic. I shouldn't be pejorative about it, of, in effect, trying to work the system to, keep getting, fresher, newer, council seats as part of their process. So that was apparently, I guess that was going on. And so there was a provision added to the charter to prevent that from happening. There was a lot of details for holding of local elections and detailed process consistent with the exercise that we're engaged in now, where there's extra details that really don't need to be there. we're frequently proposing deletion of those. So they did a little bit of that back then, which was a pretty substantial deletion. I think recognizing that a lot of that was governed by the registrar of voters, right? And wasn't really a local city thing. And so those things were eliminated with instead a reference to state law, for governing those things. There was a 3-year residency requirement in order to be an elected official back then. You could not run for election unless you'd been a resident in Santa Clara for 3 years or more. And I think they replaced it with the 30-day, requirement that there is now. They needed to do that. 3-year residency requirements were struck down as being unconstitutional, unfairly restricting people's, ability to have full rights, of being a citizen, of the United States. I forget which amendment. Might even be First Amendment, free speech and other rights, and provisions. And so that was deleted. It was unconstitutional. So it was good that it was deleted. So they were involved in the compliance with law, aspects of this as well. They changed back then, considered a modern thing, all references to, it was all male references. It was all him, his, he. That was deleted and replaced with his, her, everywhere. As you know, we're going now to the even more modern convention and either using the title itself, so you don't have to use a pronoun, you're using the title, or where you do, you use they to encompass, whatever, his, her, and anything else. They deleted details for calling a special election and instead referred to the, that's wrong, special meeting, that should say. They deleted details for calling a special meeting and instead referred to the Brown Act. They deleted requirements for meetings to be held at City Hall and instead deferred to the Brown Act. They deleted outdated provisions regarding the taxing system and limits on the city's ability to tax. Again, at that time, that had become outdated. And so as you'll remember in the particularly the fiscal group, there's a number of sections there that we're getting rid of entirely that just have the headings and show that they were deleted. It was this, comprehensive amendment back in the year 2000 that did that. Other than that, just kind of little things here or there. So while it was comprehensive, very small c in comprehensive, not anywhere near the enterprise that this group is engaged in now. So when I say lessons, I don't know that there are so much as there is some resonance in the kinds of things that they were doing back then are the kinds of things, that this group's doing now, just in a much more comprehensive and detailed manner. So please look at that. And if you've got any questions about it, either tonight or at any other time, give me a call if you want an explanation of it. Again, I can't swear to you that the underlined strikeout version I gave to you is the last one, but I believe it's a substantial provision. Here's one note. The underlined strikeout version included a proposed revision to the Public Works section that changed the $1,000 threshold for city council approval of public works or for approval of the use of city forces to engage in public works. It proposed to change it from $1,000 to $50,000. That, I think, was taken out and proposed separately at that same election or maybe at a later election. Because these proposed changes were approved. Whereas that one, you'll remember when I gave you a history lesson on what I learned about the different provisions that had been proposed and rejected. That proposal was rejected at the time, by the voters, the proposal to increase from 1,000 to 50,000. So you'll see in this underlined strikeout, that's included there, but it was not ultimately tendered and was tendered as a standalone measure and was not approved by the electorate at that time, some time ago.
Thank you. Was there no sticky note your law clerk found that said, don't try to replace the whole thing at once? That didn't come up. Okay, good.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Measure, and maybe there's a benefit of doing everything at once, right? As opposed to parsing things out. But so that's it on that section. Finally, really, and we're getting close to the end here, I wanted to talk to you about scheduling requirements of where we're at in the process. This is, you had a little version of this at your last meeting, but still, we're targeting an initial presentation to the city council on June 9th. If further council direction is needed, this would be scheduled for June 23rd, with the concept of final action occurring on their meeting on July 14th. This schedule was included in the update to them, so they've seen this and know they're paying attention that this is coming kind of in that form. But of course, before we get to any of that, we need to be done with our own work, and we're likely going to need one or more additional CRC meetings in May and or June. The current meeting that you've got is scheduled for May 20th at Central Library, and then on June 17th in City Council Chambers. Next slide here. As you saw a little clumsily with how the system works, we did solicit your input in polling, for these additional meetings. Sorry about how that came out. It's a goofy system. And the poll since we solicited your availability, the rapacious ad hoc subcommittees have eaten up 2 of those dates that probably weren't going to be dates we were going to be ready for the extra meeting anyway. So I think that makes sense for ad hoc subcommittees to do that. May 6th only had 8 of you being able to attend anyway. May 13th, the same. Now we've got ad hoc subcommittees meeting on both of those. But we had pretty good response for May 27th. 11 yes, 1 no. Sorry, whoever that no person is. So I think I'm going to propose, Mr. Chair, at some point for action to actually schedule that as one of your additional kind of special meetings. I don't know if we should do June 10th yet, but maybe we should tentatively schedule that for a special meeting. The juxtaposition of that with the council meeting on the 9th might be a little too close to turn that around, and respond to what the council action is. And so we may need to go further, deeper into June as opposed to scheduling that June 10th. But I might suggest for this group, at least to take action, if it makes sense, to ask that May 27th be identified as a special meeting.
Willing to proceed with that now while we have all the yes votes there in your impromptu poll. How would you recommend we structure that? Just move to schedule a vote for the full committee? All right, so a motion then to schedule a full committee meeting on 27 May 2026. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Crutchlow. We get a vote on that, staff?
Holly Roberts,
Yes.
Pat Nicolai and Bernard Tanzi are absent. Mohammed Naveed,
Yes, please.
John Brooks,
Yes.
Joe Sasinski,
Yes.
Eric Crutchlow,
Yes.
Bert Field, Steve Kelly, Lauren Diamond,
Yes.
Eric Jensen,
Yes.
Mark Beckman,
No.
Susan Peters.
Yes.
The yeses have it. Sorry, Mark. With that, and if that wraps up your presentation on this item, I have a few questions.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, I'm not, and I don't think I think I'm going to recommend, Mr. Chair, we wait on June 10th, just because I think we're going to pull for later in June for a more timely meeting. Now that's relates better to the what we hope will be the June 9th, initial presentation to the city council. So yes, available for any questions about this.
So now that we're into the home run here, what do you envision these meetings looking like, especially the 1 or 2 we have that will precede the June 9th meeting of city council? I'm curious as to whether you intend will be voting as a block on markups per committee, where there might be text that is related between committees. Have you given some thought to this? And if so, can we hear it now or should we talk it out now?
Yeah, I'd love input from the group about that. I'll give you what my preliminary thoughts are on it. Right now, we've got May 20th and May 27th, right, as the meetings that hopefully will be in a position to receive from subcommittees that have gotten to that point, their recommendations on some or all of their, section language. And I'm sorry. Oh, June 17th might be available. Okay. Did we poll on that or?
No, that's.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I got you. That's when the actual meeting is. I'm sorry. Yeah. Very good. So I think we can wait on the June meeting. So the thought was to have the groups, the subcommittees that have met, that are most ready, right? That have most of their provisions to present with assistance from staff, of course, their proposed language for those sections by subcommittee, right? Even though some of it's an overlap, it might make sense for group 2 and group 3 to go on the same night, right? Because there's so much interlapping, between those two. And those in theory could be taken up together, or separately. But a lot of the rest of them are really, could be standalone. And so depending upon how the next, I guess I would suggest, you can see these upcoming subcommittee meetings, depending upon how those go, right? Try to be in a position to have at least 2 groups, if not 3 groups, in a position to recommend, for this group's input and potential action, the proposed changes in those sections. And so a lot of work between now and then, but that's the thought, is to have 2 or 3 at each one of those meetings. And if possible, in effect, the components for assembly and referral back to staff to assemble, a full initial presentation to the city council on June 9th.
Okay, so the June 9th presentation will be the initial one. So if not all subcommittees have completed their work, or we, if as
That's
a
right.
committee have not approved the entire package, ready to go.
That's right. I'm trying to be realistic, right? This was such an ambitious project. If we could have all of it together, we would have it together. But whatever is done, I think it's important to get at least some of it in front of the city council, by June 9th. So they have see what it looks like, right? And are in a position to at least provide initial, feedback. So, and eating the elephant one bite at a time, one subcommittee at a time. That's my thought. The thing that we need to still do a lot of work on is, even frankly, for how it's going to be presented to you, but for especially how it's presented to council, how we show the changes, right?
Before you going, because I want to go first, because
Yeah, you go first. Yeah.
Is, are we going to present it both to this committee and to the city council in its initial presentation as part of the entire replacement, or in red line versus where it stands today? So are we going to have sections 1 or articles 1 and then sections 100? Is that your intention?
Yeah, that's again what I think they need to at least have in their hands an underlined strikeout, right? I think they need a clean version. I think they need an underlined strikeout. And then I think they need something annotated in one or both of those documents to provide them some guidance on, kind of what was changed and what at that point, right, what levels we think they are, right? And that's how we
So I missed asking, just so I'm trying to make clear what I'm saying to everybody, is we have this notion of presenting a fully redrafted, everything moved to the right place, renumbered with new articles,
Yes.
1 section. Is it your intention that the city council and this committee will see that as part of this initial presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
That is my objective. But I think it might be, sorry, I probably thought you were asking more than that. I think it needs to be more than that, though. Again, for tracking and annotation purposes and categorization of levels. And so both the clean version, especially the clean version, but probably the underlying strikeout version needs to have some annotations to explain what was changed, right? And the kind of level of how we would categorize levels of changes, right? Level 1 stuff, we're probably not going to highlight, but it'll probably be, hey, this is level 2, this might be level 3. Anything else that was changed is just level 1, right? And refer to the underlying strikeout to see what the level 1 stuff is.
Okay, so that your idea then is we'll lay out, here is the brand new version with articles 1, 2, and 3 and so forth. And the strikeout or the red line on that will be reflecting levels 2, 3, and 4.
All of the above, yes. And again, I'm still working on how each of one of those look. It might be 3 versions of it, right? It might be a clean version, it might be an underlying strikeout version, and then it might be somewhere in between that shows sections side by side, right? That are underlying the struck out sections. So if it's hard for them to see the underlying strikeout all in one place, and as all of you who have seen, when we're going through the sections, what it looks like, it's very kind of challenging and almost not helpful, to have the underlying strikeouts. So I'm trying to conceive of a hybrid version of it, again, to communicate in as many different ways as possible that are useful to them in understanding what it originally said, what changes were made, and what it looks like now. And that could be 3 versions and annotated in some way. We will, at one of your first meetings, if not the 20th or the 27th, obviously try that out on you, because you're more involved in it. So you're not as needful of those different tools, with how deep you are involved in it. But you obviously care about how it's presented. I care about how it's presented, and you want it to be digestible by them. And if it's not, they're going to be resistant, right?
So one last thought, and I'll hand it back over to the committee for y'all's thoughts on this as well, and Glenn, for you to finish your not yet prepared remarks. But I think it's worth agendizing at both of those meetings preceding the meeting on the 9th, an opportunity for you to present, here's how I intend the council to see it. We're all on the same page now.
Absolutely.
Would it be appropriate to move to agendize that at this point, or would that be something you guys handle?
You don't need to formally direct me to do that. I was intending to do that anyway. Yep.
Did you want to finish your?
That was really all the preview. The next item is preview of next meeting, right? And it's going to be at the library. It's going to be the approval of minutes. It's going to be report out from subcommittees, and then again, CRC action direction on any final subcommittee, recommendations. And so I will be as far along as possible on this meeting about how that might look to the city council as well for part of your direction and input.
Okay, so Member Clutch, I think, has a few things to add to that, or is it to the next thing? Is it to that? Okay, and does anybody else? I'm just worried if this needs to be properly agendized as a discussion, or if we can have some more not yet agendized discussion as to how it'll be presented now.
You don't, this is well within the parameters of what you can talk about here, of how you want the input from the group about how you want things presented either to you or to the city council. I'm all ears. I'm still wrestling with it myself. I have general idea of it, but a lot of it will be, as I look at it and we start to assemble it all. I know how it was done down in Chula Vista. I'm going to try a version of that, but this is even more dramatic, than that, because of how many sections were taken from one place, and moved to another that really wasn't done there. And so what that looks like and how that's communicated is very important. And I'm not sure, honestly, I would love everybody's, input on it. You might need to see it first, right? In order to be able to comment on whether or not that was successful or not, or whether or not you want something different.
Okay, since this is our deliverable. I'm going to let Eric go next because member Crutchlow, because he's already on green. And then I think Mark is also on green. We'll give a pass through so everybody has a chance to weigh on this. I think this being our deliverable is something we want to weigh in on.
Yeah, so my first question is, are we getting a packet beforehand that we can review when you have a final, actions and directions from a subcommittee? Because to give it on the same night is not going to be very productive in my mind.
You will have a packet to review.
How soon before the meeting?
I can't promise what that will be. The,
72 hours?
as soon in advance of the meeting as possible. Yeah.
Okay, I take your good graces and I believe this. Thank you very much, because that is very, very important.
Yeah, so, the next subcommittee meetings, right, are April 16th, May 6th, May 11th, May 12th, May 13th. Well, the April 16th and May, and unfortunately, group 3 is May 13th. That's pretty close to the May, 20th meeting. But the ones that meet sooner, right, I'm going to be in a better position to take all of that and package it. The ones that meet later, we could be scrambling, right, to get all that, ready. So I do promise you that it will be in advance. Ideally, when the agenda packet goes out. So, that would be the Friday before the Wednesday. It would be my intent. So good Lord, what is that?
That's fine. I mean, I understand
What is
that. I
that
just
name?
want to save up my AI.
I'm sorry, I'm just
to
having
review
a
all this
little
stuff.
heart attack now in front of you as to
No,
what that day is.
that's fine, Glenn.
Still weeks
I trust
earlier
you.
than you could have it.
Yeah. No, I trust you on that one. But Ms. Roberts, Holly, since you're an expert in this, one of my thoughts is, how like when you do QA and you're going to release,
Yeah.
you have a release notes that have a summary of changes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was, so Glenn?
I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. No problem.
We're
It's quite all right. Don't worry. So one of the things we were thinking about is, I know Holly is the expert in QA. I've worked a lot with QA. When we make, when we tell somebody we're releasing a new application, a new version, right? We have release notes and we have a summary of changes so that they can look at that. Maybe you were already considering that. I didn't quite understand that, but I was thinking, the way that format is, we could give you examples and suggestions
Yeah.
if that would be
would love to see it.
Yeah, so release notes would work, or even like a diff, like a get diff, where you have like on one side of the page, what it looks like now, and on the other side, what it looked like before. And I don't know if you can match up things like 1-to-1, but that might be a good thing, that just each page, because you guys like paper. So each page has like before and after on it.
Yes. Yeah, if you guys have program systems that you've used before that do that, that is exactly what
Well, it won't.
we had in mind,
won't
but
do
I
it.
don't know that I
It
don't
won't
know
do
that I
it
have
for you.
access to the same tools you do.
It won't do it for you. You'll have to do it yourself, but
code.
Okay, when you say you mean Courtney, right?
No, we were pointing at you. Courtney's been doing too much work already. But I was thinking in terms of even if you gave us electronic versions of, the original, which we have here, and then the new ones, there may be some tools that, we can look at and find and try and help you out with, and at least give you some assistance on that, because it is a monumental task you're doing.
Yeah, very good. Appreciate that. And yeah, we've been thinking about this. I've done it before, but honestly, so far we've just been focused on the substance of it, right? The issues and the drafting. And obviously we're at a point where that's why we're talking about it, right? We need to start thinking about the form, of presentation, and I'm happy to, as our thinking evolves, run it past anyone who's interested in providing me kind of some input and feedback on, informally as a little mini ad hoc form, subcommittee to provide, input on that. So appreciate your guys' expertise there. We'll definitely benefit from it.
Can I add something? The great thing I would look for if I was just a casual person looking at this would be have the old, the new, and the goal, the reason why we're making the change. What is the purpose of the change? What's the goal? And if I can see the goal, yeah, let's go for it. But I think it's important to have the original, the change, and then why.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A little bit of that is built into the levels, right? With some of the definitional structure around the levels, but you're proposing something a little more than that, right?
I think
Yeah, no, I
what
understand
you're saying
exactly.
is, I want to do a side-by-side comparison. And I think in theory, I like that. I'm not sure of all the changes that we made, if that's even possible without it being crazy, but
Overwhelming.
as much as we can, I think that makes sense. And that's why I was talking about a summary of changes, like saying, okay, look, I'm not going to talk about all these different things here, but the net of it was, this is what it was, and this is what we decided to change it to. And your point about like, well, why did you do that? What was the goal?
At the end of the day, optics is critical. When people look at what we did, I would like for them to see why we did it. And that's important.
So
Yeah,
we-
and there's an overall, purpose and goal, but you're right, there's different things that relate to the different changes that are made. Some of it's just a pure level one, right? Cleanup and language change. Other of it's to say, hey, the law, the what was deleted was illegal. And the goal was to make it legal. Or this wasn't clear, but this is how it currently works. The idea is to, include language that describes how it currently works, which is a best practice. So I think there can be, a lot of it's going to be, maybe we can develop some standard phrases, right? The levels are meaningful, but there's probably some goal-related extractions from those levels that we can use and code, on the different changes that are made in order to help annotate it.
To make that simple, Glenn, I could say you have like a list 1 through 6, and 1 could be this reason, 2 could be this reason. You could actually, instead of writing it out every time, just say, see note 6, see note 5, and that might save you from being redundant.
I have concerns that this group won't have enough time to effectively review this, especially as we, if we're still getting it in parts. I agree with Eric, getting things ahead of time and doing a review. And then each of us, needs to read it and then be able to highlight those things that we want to talk to the subcommittee about, because we haven't seen it in both what the content or the context of how the committee saw it, as well as the context of change within this global change that we've made. So that's my concern, that we provide enough time for this committee to, because if we don't get the optics right here, the city or the citizens won't either.
I agree with that completely. And boy, I would love another 6 months, right?
No,
I'd love
agree, just to
another-
work on the presentation.
I'd love another 3 months. I'd love another month. But you're right, that's not we have the time that we have. And so it needs to be presented in advance with full context. One of the reasons why I did a little bit more detailed of a report out tonight, again, is it doesn't replace what you're talking about. I know we were talking about something more, but to start again to, even if it's not your committee, have the folks who are going to be acting on, stuff they didn't work on and need to understand it, to start to have some interactions, with the details, and the comments, so that you'll be more ready, right, by the time it comes to you. But you still need time, you still need context, and you may have just informally suggested we might need yet another meeting of this group, another special meeting, particularly, and I apologize, you're missing on the one on the 27th. And so we might need to, poll for, yet another one if we can find time and a facility for you guys all to meet. I hate to impose on your time any more than I have already, but it might be necessary as we get down to the end here.
Was the hard deadline? Council had to.
City council needs to take final action on July 14th.
Meeting on the 9th is their first viewing.
Meeting on the 9th, if we can make it, right, will be their first viewing.
So what do you envision right now as being the contents of the report out? And obviously, the report out will include the substantive changes you're making to the language. Are the subcommittees, are we going to provide you with an explanation of the changes we are making? To Mark's point, I think to understand that language and the motivation, it would help if we had an explanation come with it. Are we writing that or are you?
Ultimately, I've got to do the lion's share of it, right? And I'm already looking at, for example, Sunnyvale's report, right? And how they presented their, changes as not a model, because I think they overdid certain things given the changes that they made. And it doesn't need quite the explanation and analysis, that they gave it, but a report that that staff would lead on, but that ideally, and maybe this would be something that can be agendized for the subcommittee groups, a designated person from each subcommittee to assist with the review and commentary on the report that's going to go to council too. It could be the secretary, but it need not be the secretary, if the group has a different appetite for that. So probably each subcommittee designating somebody. So there's another group, that works with staff in reviewing the report as it's finalized, because I want as much of your guys' input as you're willing to, provide. It's only added value, as we've gone along. I wish I could have more of it, right, with more time permitting. But that's my thought about how there might be some more direct member participation in the report.
I would have to believe that the meetings that we have were as a group, as we're going through this as the larger committee, that the points that come up that have the most discussions are the ones where we're going to pull out the summaries as to this is what's going to need context for an explanation for the council, because they probably won't review it as, certainly won't review it in as much detail as us. And I would think the expectation is that they want us to, to talk about the substantive, conversations that we had about this particular item or another.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's going to be interesting and June 9th will be, indicative of that, how they think about it and approach it. They could be very deferential, right, to the work that's done if they understand it and it stays within the parameters, right, of what they envisioned themselves. But different members on the council may have different feelings about what they told, to do and what the charge was and whether or not the work product, here fell within those, parameters. And so, but I think your point's a good one. I think input from this group, not just me, no matter how much of the work, that needs to be done right by me and my team, and context and explanation about what the thinking, was behind it. It's going to be really important. I think a lot of that needs to go into the written report too, as opposed to just, the presentation, because they've only got so much time and bandwidth, right, for reviewing it, themselves. And so it's going to need to be tight. And when I say that, I mean just like disciplined and really on point. And for me, the best way to do that with them, even if they might not always be that way when it comes out to them in their discussions, is to have it all in the report, right? So you can refer to the report that makes the points that you really want to make, at least the essence of, of the comments. And then with informed people representing each, individual subcommittee, prepared when there's a question to, while I'll be there, of course, right, to provide the professional staff response, to add the, perspective of the subcommittee and or, committee at large. So there's, if any of you are thinking about what role can I play in getting this across the finish line, there's a role for, providing review and input on the report itself. And then there is a role for being at, the council meeting where your particular assigned section, is coming up for their consideration. And probably Pat Nikolai, the, chair, hopefully, depending upon his availability, having a meaningful, maybe outsized role, or appropriate to the chair, role, and being able to be an ambassador and spokesperson for the group.
Okay, any more thoughts on that? Or we can wrap that one up.
I just had one question or suggestion. We have 7 days between the 13th, group 3 meeting and the next group of the whole group. And 7 days later, we have the subsequent meeting. It would be helpful, I believe, if you could share the Queen Charter as soon as possible, as Member Crutchlow suggested, but perhaps allow us to comment, make live comments on a shared copy that we can feed the commentary process on the May 20th meeting.
And when you say clean version, you mean the version that includes all the changes, right?
The one,
Yeah.
the clean version, so that we can look at it and as a group discuss the changes for that 20th.
Yep, appreciate that.
No,
Yeah, as opposed to like I've been doing it live. Hey, look at all the changes.
It's just too much discussion.
Yeah,
It's better to do it.
Yep, I understand. We're at that point. You know why I've been doing it that way, aside from the fact that I'm only just ready, just before the meeting to actually have it all done, is, preliminary drafts are more thought process, as opposed to, recommendations. But now we're at a point where you guys, even if we're not disclosing that yet publicly, you guys need versions of it in advance to be able to look at it, not just for the 20th, but for your subcommittee meetings as well. Yep. So I think that's a good.
I'd also like to point
good
out
thought.
that if you're using Microsoft tools for that, there may be people here who don't have access or easy access to those tools. And I believe even in the poll, there are people who couldn't, forget the word, but they couldn't log in. So there might be some technical IT issues that some members may have. I didn't have any myself, but there's quite a bit of email regarding access.
Very good.
Poll was a pain in the backside, I will say.
Yeah. So you don't want me to use the polling technology for purposes of
No,
sharing?
Maybe
the
not
drafts?
Microsoft.
I think it was the authenticator. I didn't have a problem myself, but some people don't have Microsoft tools like Authenticator on their phones, and they may have issues. And I think it's the most effective way of doing it for us. But I just want to point out there may be some members who may have some trouble and probably should plan ahead for that.
Very good. All good comments. Appreciate that.
With that, we will close that item and begin public presentations.
Andre,
There's not.
That
I
then
want to
we will
wait just
turn.
a minute to see, right, if that might have snuck up on them. Mr. Chair, just recommending, there's only a couple people on. I don't want to steamroll them if they're just hearing now that this is an opportunity for them to provide public presentations. And so while I'm talking, they're being given time. I will observe for the record, there's no one actually physically here in the chambers. There's a couple people observing online, and neither have raised their hand in the time that I've been talking about it. So I'm comfortable with you proceeding then, Mr. Chair.
Well, staff, do you have any comments for the committee? No.
No further comments at this time.
Thank you. I believe that's the reports. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Third.
And you can do it by consensus, by
By,
acclamation.
Anybody want? to
Unanimous
stay?
consensus, we adjourned at 8:21 PM, 16 April.
I apologize that